welcome to Flow, a generative nonlinear MIDI sequencer for Ableton Live that lets you create music algorithmically. Flow offers you a new way of composing music, where you don't have to manually place each note on a grid or a piano roll. Instead, you can set up simple steps and rules that guide how the music evolves over time. This introduction will demonstrate the basic concepts of flow, how to use it, and what kind of musical results you can achieve with it. Let's get started. Flow uses a simple and powerful concept called a state machine to generate music. A state machine is a system that has a number of states, each containing some musical information, and transition rules for switching between these states. For example, this state machine has 8 states that define notes for a sliced drum loop sample. The transitions between these states are defined by a matrix that shows the chance of going from one state to another. The first row of the matrix tells what happens after the first state plays. This cell here means that the second state will always play next. Similarly, the second state will be followed by the third one, and so on. The last state will go back to the first one to make a loop. So, in this particular case, the states will always play in a fixed, linear order. If you press play, you will hear the original drum loop. The UI also highlights the current state and the transition that brought you to it. However, Flow can create complex patterns and behaviors that go beyond simple linear sequences. Each cell of the matrix shows the chance of choosing that transition over the others, and you can increase the chances of nonlinear transitions to create more varied patterns. Now the sample slices that make up a drum loop play in a nonlinear order. Let's look at another example. This state machine generates chord progressions in a C minor scale and creates harmonic movement. It has 7 states, each representing one of the 7 chords in the scale. The transition rules reflect the likelihood of each chord following another one in minor harmonies. For instance, the chance of going to D diminished from any other state is lower than other transitions, which means it is rare to occur. You can increase the chances of some transitions that create a sense of tension and resolution in music. With probabilistic transitions, Flow can create patterns that sound diverse and unpredictable, but not completely random at the same time. They still follow your musical vision and respect the rules you set up. Still, this is just the beginning of what Flow can do. It has 4 parallel sequencer parts that run simultaneously, each with its own parameters such as speed, level, and more. This allows you to create rich and diverse polyrhythmic patterns, where each part has a different function in the composition. For example, you can use part 1 to generate a chord progression, part 2 to play an arpeggio, part 3 to create a melody, and part 4 to modulate the sound of your synths. All these parts will play together and harmonize with each other, adding depth and variation. Similarly, you can create interesting and dynamic drum patterns, where each part controls a different element of the rhythm. For instance, you can have part 1 produce kick and snare notes, part 2 play hi-hats with different velocities, part 3 add ghost notes or fills to create groove and movement, and part 4 trigger cymbals to mark accents every few bars. So far, we've seen state machines with up to 8 states in total. They can generate interesting musical sequences, but they might become too repetitive after a while. To add more variety and depth to your music, Flow allows you to create complex hierarchical structures of musical patterns. You can turn any simple trigger state into a state machine with its own nested states and transition rules. You can nest state machines within state machines, creating virtually unlimited possibilities for your musical patterns. For example, look at this part that plays 3 different arpeggios: C minor, E flat major, and G minor. Each arpeggio is a nested state machine with 4 states, representing the notes of the arpeggio. The final state of each arpeggio is marked with a cross symbol, indicating that it will return to the parent state machine when it is reached. The parent state machine then decides what to do next: repeat the same arpeggio or switch to a different one, based on the probabilities assigned to each transition. Part 3 of this generative pattern also uses a hierarchical state machine to create a melody that alternates between C minor pentatonic and G minor pentatonic scales. Similarly, this example here creates a drum pattern with variations and fills. It uses nested state machines to play different kick and snare patterns, and sometimes switches to playing the toms. This hierarchical nature of flow lets you organize your musical patterns into complex structures that are limited only by your imagination. You can create rich and dynamic sequences that can play for a long time without sounding boring or predictable. That's Flow, a generative and nonlinear MIDI sequencer that offers you a new way of composing music. You can set up simple steps and rules that guide how the music evolves over time, and these rules cause more complex behaviors and patterns to emerge. If you want to learn more about Flow, visit our website where you can find more examples, documentation, and getting started guides. Experience the power and fun of Flow for yourself and download the demo version. Or purchase the full product today and let your musical ideas flow like never before.